Hello.
Hello.
Hello there. How are y'all doing today? Welcome back. Restoration Fellowship, day 31 of the Counting of the Omer.
Yes. Woohoo.
Yeah, so we are approaching all the more the times that and the appointed times of one of his feast days.
Yes.
And these are all those times leading up to it because we're supposed to be gaining something from this. And I know I have. Just
I
in,
have too.
in
Yeah, this is
doing
good.
this on a daily basis, it's been helping me a lot just to put some things and thoughts together. Working with my wife here on some of those things, and just looking at some of the. We've been getting a lot more response from people because we've had. Let's see, it's over 4,000 people have been reached supposedly in doing these videos every day and every night, with over 2,000 people engaging with the videos in some way or form, and I think that's pretty encouraging about some things. So thank y'all. Be sure you have an opportunity, share these videos if it addresses some questions or things that you think need to, send them out. We're getting them put up slowly on on our website, so they'll be there available all the time. And I know we've been talking about we're wanting to continue this
Yes.
once or twice a week at least.
Yes.
Even after the Omer count, we seem to like doing these videos. How about that?
Yeah. Well, we bounce good off of each other, I think.
So we're enjoying that and enjoying getting to do these things. And so we are here, day 31. Let me get something started here. But so we're day 31. And well, how many times do I have to click the same thing? You want to do the blessing tonight,
I would
dear?
like to, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. Today is day 3 of week 5 of the counting of the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivanu al shafarat ha'omer. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us about the counting of the Omer. Amen.
Okay. So we are back in the book of Hebrews.
Yes.
And that's just there's some really exciting things in here. And of course, the premise of the book of Hebrews, as we've been talking about the last few nights, is it's about the mid to late 60s AD, so about 30 years after the resurrection. There's starting to be some increasing conflict within the Jewish community because it's written to Hebrews that are the Jewish people who are believers who are still living in Jerusalem, for where the church is still, has its original base. And some of them are starting to get kicked out of the temple. They're starting to get kicked out of the synagogues and even potentially even the city itself. And they're considering in order for me to get back in good standing with the temple, back in good standing with the synagogue, then maybe I have to deny Yeshua. If I can, say I don't believe in him anymore, will that put me back in good standing? And so Hebrews has all been about establishing, if you've got Yeshua, if you've got the Messiah, you've got something even better than anything they can offer you in return. And so that is so much of what he's trying to establish.
Because the temple was always pointing to Messiah. The tabernacle was pointing to Messiah. The temple was pointing to Messiah. And so without Messiah, the temple is empty.
That its function, its purpose is to point to Messiah.
Yes. Yes, the ceremonies were still going on. Yes, they're important, but without Messiah, it's not what it's supposed to be.
The heart of it is missing.
Yes.
And so that's what he's establishing. If you've got Messiah, then the whole point of the temple's existence, you already have.
Yes.
And so you don't need to try to gain something back with that which you already have. And so that's where we've been talking about it. And so we've made it through midway through chapter 6. And that he ends that, he talks about the possibility of going back on your decision of faith. and how they shouldn't do that. He says in verse 9 of chapter 6, we speak like this, but concerning you, we are convinced of better things coming with salvation. All right, so we long for each of you to show the same eagerness for the certainty of hope to the very end, so you will not be sluggish, but imitators of those inheriting the promises through trust and perseverance. That's where we finished off last night in verse 12. And so then we're going to kick off to finish chapter 6. And I'm just, so we don't get too bogged down in it, we've committed to just read the ending of chapter 6 from 13 to the end of 6.
See if you can do it.
I'll try. And let's see if she can not stop me either. So we're gonna read this and
make a little mask with my hand.
Yeah. Yes, we're not practicing social distancing at the moment, so we need a mask. Yeah. So anyway, verse 13 says, "Now when God made his promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, 'Surely I will bless you, and surely I will multiply you.' And so, after waiting patiently, Abraham reached the promise. For people swear by someone greater, and the oath, as confirmation, is an end to all their disputing. In the same way," man, that almost got me there. "In the same way, God, determining to point out more clearly to the heirs of the promise the unchanging nature of his purpose, guaranteed it with an oath. So by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie," very true, "we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. And we have this hope as an anchor of the soul, both firm and steady, a hope that enters the inner place behind the curtain. Yeshua has entered there as a forerunner on our behalf, having become Kohen Gadol forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." Okay, you want to start with that, dear? Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so one of the things that...
It was what he's about to say, actually, when we were just about to get started, he says, "I've been thinking about this." So now he wants me to share what he was thinking about.
Well,
nice try. Go ahead.
I'm saying if you wanted to
Go ahead.
Do something else or say anything else. All right. So one of the things that we've been saying, for a while in these videos and things is about the nature of salvation. And how there are some that try to make the Torah, try to make the law of God a salvation issue, right. And that's oftentimes how it's talked about. I mean, Paul does talk about it in those terms, that if you are keeping the Torah to earn your salvation, that's never going to happen. Because Torah, salvation is not based on the righteousness attained through Torah. Because if it could be attained through the Torah, then Christ died for nothing. I mean, He says that point blank. So we do not attain salvation in any way because of keeping the Torah. However,
in terms of justification.
In terms of justification. Now, it is a discipleship program.
Yes.
The Torah is His discipleship program. It was given to a redeemed people. That's the important thing to keep in mind. And this is one of the points that we've been making. That the promise, and this is the section here, this is why he goes back to Abraham. The promise of salvation was made to Abraham, and the promise was delivered, was conducted and carried out under the Abrahamic covenant. Mm-hmm. While they were still in Egypt, they were still under the promise given to Abraham and the patriarchs. So they were redeemed from Egypt based on the promise. And that's the whole point of what he's saying here. That God made his promise to Abraham, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was based not on Abraham's obedience. It was not based on anything that Abraham had done through the Torah to get this salvation. It was based on God's promise. I will bless you and surely will multiply you. So that fulfillment of those things, which he says, he couldn't swear by anybody greater. There's nobody who can take any credit for this other than him. So all of that salvation, all of that redemption happens under the Abrahamic covenant. And that's the essential thing that we've been talking about for all along, and that is that promise is that supposed to be that anchor for the soul that he talks about, that God, he is going to be the one that does this. He is going to be the one that accomplishes that. It's not going to be, the salvation and redemption occurred before the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. Salvation and redemption occurred before and without the temple.
Before the Ten Commandments.
Before the Ten Commandments. So again, those things were added to a redeemed people. Mm-hmm. Not in order to redeem them, but because they had been redeemed.
Right.
And so what hit me as we were looking over some of these passages is he introduces in the very last statement, Yeshua has entered there as a forerunner. This is the end of Hebrews chapter 6. He entered there as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a Kohen Gadol forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And when you look at that, those are events he's describing events and referring back to events that occurred back in Genesis 14, where Abraham goes off and rescues his nephew Lot after he had been captured, after he had been living in Sodom and such like that. He returns from defeating these 5 kings, and then the king of Sodom goes out to meet him, and then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, which should be a pretty big indicator for things, because those are the exact same kind of items that are present at the Last Supper, bread and wine. And so he is this is a meal. This is a relationship establishing meal that's going on here, a covenant meal. Mm-hmm. So Melchizedek, king of Salem, brings out the bread and wine. He was priest of El Elyon, God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram by El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be El Elyon, God Most High, who gave over your enemies into your hand." And then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And what happens here is it's contrasted what the king of Sodom brings. He brings nothing. He just, give me the people, you can keep everything. It's a payoff kind of a thing for him.
And the writer of Hebrews is going to keep referring back to this event, even when he starts talking about the Aaronic priesthood.
Yes.
So this event is crucial in understanding the book of Hebrews.
Yes, because what he is establishing is by saying that Yeshua is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. See, the Aaronic priesthood was established by what?
The Mosaic covenant.
The Mosaic covenant. Everything about the priesthood of Aaron, everything about the high priest, everything about the instructions for the tabernacle and the temple were given as part of the Mosaic covenant. But Yeshua has a priesthood that predates the Mosaic covenant.
Yes.
Yeshua is a priest, a high priest, under the Abrahamic covenant. Because right after this chapter of chapter 14, where he meets with Melchizedek, they have a covenant meal. He gives him a tenth of the plunder. Chapter 15 is right where the covenant is cut with God. Mm-hmm. Do not fear, Abraham. I am your shield, your very great reward. Adonai comes to Abraham, and they cut this covenant in chapter 15. That's where it said that, Abram believed Adonai, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And in verse 18 of chapter 15, on that day, the Lord, Adonai, cut a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your seed from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. So everything about that is the Abrahamic covenant. Melchizedek is a part in a participant essentially in the Abrahamic covenant, and it's the Abrahamic covenant that redemption takes place. Mm-hmm. And so Yeshua is a high priest under the Abrahamic covenant, not the Mosaic covenant. And so it's under his work, it's under his provision, and what he does is where redemption happens. And so why would you want to go to a high priest under the Mosaic covenant whom
was never intended for
was never
justification or redemption or salvation in that sense.
Right. So that was the ending of chapter 6.
Yes.
And so, and again, these are concepts that are difficult for us as Gentiles to come to terms with, because we don't really understand these things. We didn't grow up with these concepts. We didn't grow up with a functioning temple, a functioning priesthood, or none of those things. We don't really talk about covenants all that much. We talk about covenant theology.
Well,
but that's something different.
We understand it as a promise, but a promise in our culture is a much looser thing than a covenant is.
Mm-hmm.
The covenants were life binding.
Mm-hmm.
They were the most powerful promise you could possibly make.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we don't really understand covenant. We don't do that. A marriage is the closest thing we've got, and look how easily people break that covenant these days.
Mm-hmm. So again, the messianic perspective really brings these concepts to life, because they try to put it back in its original context. And so the ending of Hebrews 6 is making the point that Yeshua is the high priest under the Abrahamic covenant, under which redemption takes place. And that is superior for you, for your eternity in the long run. You have to have that, because without that, then the keeping of the Torah is meaningless. Christ died for nothing, as Paul talked about it. So with that, anything else you wanted to add before we move into 7?
I'm ready to go into 7.
Okay, you want to read a little bit for 7?
Okay. For this Melchizedek was king of Salem, Cohen, or priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of kings and blessed him. Remember, Kelly just read about that. And to him, Abraham apportioned 1/10 of everything. First, by translation of his name, he is king of righteousness. That's what Melchizedek means.
Melchizedek.
Okay, king righteousness.
Melchi is the word king. Zedek is righteousness.
Okay, so and then also king of Salem, which is king of Shalom, or peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like Ben Elohim, the Son of God, he remains a Cohen, or a priest, for all time, which is exactly what Yeshua is. Yeshua is the Son of God, who is a Cohen forever, who is a priest for all time.
He is the King of Righteousness. Yeshua is the Prince of Peace. Well, those are titles that we're familiar with, and that's something different than the Aaronic priesthood, the earthly priesthood. When they came back from exile from Babylon and all of that, there were many who were Levites, but they could not prove. They didn't have the documentation.
Right, it was the documentation.
The documentation to verify that they were descendants of Aaron. And so, yes, they were from the right tribe, but they could not prove, so they could not serve as priests anymore.
Right.
They couldn't prove it or verify it. So the whole idea of you have to be able to prove your genealogy in order to serve as a priest. That's a very Jewish reckoning and understanding of things. So they know that. But here is this man, this Melchizedek, who shows up essentially out of nowhere. They don't know he didn't have to have any credentials to establish that he was descendant from the right line, the right tribe. Nothing. He is just suddenly there.
And of course, Yeshua is not descended from the right tribe according to the Levitical priesthood.
Yes, Yeshua, and that's the point he's going to make in a little while.
He's going to get there.
Yeshua is of the tribe of Judah.
Yes.
And priests don't come from the tribe of Judah.
Correct.
Priests come from the tribe of Levi. So here he's making the point. So this must be one of the criticisms that was existing in his day about, well, he can't be the Messiah. He's not He can't serve in the role of a high priest or whatever else because he's not from the tribe of Levi.
Right.
So,
well, Melchizedek wasn't from the right tribe either.
Guess what? Yeah.
Right, and like you just said, he functioned in a lot of ways as the priest of the Abrahamic covenant. Mm-hmm. And it's going to go even more into that. So starting in verse 4, it's going to go back to that tent that Abram gave him.
To prove how he's better and greater even than the Aaronic priesthood.
Yes. Now, see how great this man is. Even Abraham, the patriarch, gave him a tenth out of the plunder. Indeed, those sons of Levi who received the priesthood have, according to Torah, a command to collect a tithe from the people. That's how they receive their support. That's how they live. They don't get an inheritance in the land. Their inheritance is the Lord, and so they need support from the people. That is from their kin, although they have come out of the loins of Abraham. They are Abraham's descendants. But this one who did not have their genealogy has collected tithes from Abraham and has blessed him, the one holding the promises. So Melchizedek didn't come from that line of Levi. And yet he collects that tenth from Abraham, the one who is the bearer or the keeper or the one that the promises were given to. Mm-hmm. Right? The one holding the promises. Verse 7. Now it is beyond dispute that the lesser is blessed by the greater. Let that sink in for a moment, because as great as Abraham is, Melchizedek is greater. Mm-hmm. He is the priest in some way, kind of officiating over that covenant. Mm-hmm. Okay? So he is greater than Abraham. Abraham gave him a tenth. Melchizedek blessed Abraham. You know, you see even in the life of Jacob, right? Jacob blesses Pharaoh when he goes down to see Joseph. Pharaoh doesn't bless Jacob. No, the greater Jacob blesses the lesser Pharaoh.
And the world may think the exact opposite.
Right.
Here's this guy coming out from the wild, this old man who's a shepherd, who is
coming before a king,
coming before one of the most powerful men on the planet, Pharaoh, right. And Jacob blesses him. And right. So in the biblical world, in the Middle Eastern world, that is elevating Jacob over Pharaoh.
Yes, it is.
And so here is the same type of thing. Melchizedek receives an offering from Abraham, and then Melchizedek extends a blessing back unto Abraham. And so that is showing and demonstrating to that culture, to that world, that Melchizedek is on a higher level than Abraham is. And because Levi is a descendant that comes from Abraham, that means that's like that transitive.
Hold on.
Transitive property.
Hold on. That's kind of like the next
I know. Verses. I'm introducing the next two verses.
Okay, so verse 7. Now it is beyond just, verse 8. In one case, dying men receive tithes, but in the other, one about to whom it is testified that he lives on. So the greater blesses the lesser. In one case, dying men receive tithes. Who are the dying men?
Those are the priests.
The Levitical priests.
The Levitical priesthood.
They are men who are going to die, right? But in the other, one about whom it is testified that he lives on. Mm-hmm. Melchizedek.
Because he has neither beginning of days nor end of life.
So yeah, he's got no genealogy to say his priesthood is over. Mm-hmm. Right? Verse 9. Through Abraham, even Levi, the one receiving tithes, has paid the tithe, so to speak, for he was still in his father's loin when Melchizedek met him. Mm-hmm. So when Melchizedek blessed Abraham, Levi was still in the loins of Abraham. And Abraham, between Melchizedek and Abraham, is the lesser of the two. So where does that put Levi?
Mm-hmm. That Melchizedek is elevated above even Levi.
Yes. So Yeshua is a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, the highest priesthood. Mm-hmm. Right? The priesthood of the Abrahamic covenant, of redemption, of salvation, of inheritance, of all of those things that come from the Abrahamic covenant. Melchizedek was the high priest over that.
And so the Yeshua or a Messiah can be a high priest even though he's not from the tribe of Levi.
Right.
Because that was a requirement under the Mosaic covenant. He can still be a high priest because he is a priest under the Abrahamic covenant, of which that genealogy is not mandated. And this one is superior. So again, these are Jewish people who are being tempted about going back to the temple. They'd been kicked out. They'd been struggling with that. Do I need to go back and submit myself to the Levitical, Aaronic priesthood? And he's saying, why? You have a greater high priest than the one who is serving in the temple right now.
They're asking you to deny the priest, your high priest in the order of Melchizedek,
under which you have attained redemption.
Right.
And so that's the whole argument that's going on here. And he's establishing that in extremely powerful ways. And again, it may not make it may not seem as big of a deal to us, but to the Jewish people reading this, that would be huge.
Yes, it would.
That would be absolutely huge. Yes, it would,
because the Levitical priesthood in their eyes was a big deal. Mm-hmm. These were their leaders. These were their judges. These, were the ones that would go before God on the Day of Atonement. And so much of the book of Hebrews even gets into the Day of Atonement and the importance of the Day of Atonement. Mm-hmm. So these high priests in the Levitical priesthood were the ones that would go before God on the Day of Atonement. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And that's nothing to be downplayed.
No.
But Melchizedek is even higher than that.
Mm-hmm. So these priesthoods can be concurrent.
Yes.
The Aaronic priesthood serves really under the Melchizedek priesthood. They are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
So Melchizedek's priesthood continues. The Messiah's priesthood continues, all the while the Aaronic priesthood will still serve and minister. Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because Moses said that, a prophet as unto myself, right, is coming. Mm-hmm. And how did Moses function with Aaron? When Aaron was installed as the high priest, did Moses completely step back and never do anything again?
Nope.
No. They functioned together. Right? And you see that also in the kingdom. We have the king on the throne, right? We see this in the book of Ezekiel. And yet the Aaronic priesthood is also in play. Well, our king is also our high priest in the order of Melchizedek. But the Levitical priesthood will be operating.
And doesn't the king or the prince in Ezekiel, doesn't he do things as far as offerings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of helps.
It's disputed as to who the prince is.
Yeah. But I mean, that would kind of address that issue of how could he be doing that if he's not a priest? Well, if he is the priest of the Melchizedek order.
That's
again, that's all identity.
That's I know. So
that's not getting there.
That's a whole different lesson.
just thinking out loud. So So again, he's going to start reestablishing, and he's establishing the superiority of this priesthood of Messiah, of Yeshua. So verse 11, he says, "Now if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for based on it the people have been given the Torah." All right, so these came concurrently. The Torah was given and established the Levitical priesthood. What further need was there for a different priest, a different Cohen to arrive, designated according to the order of Melchizedek? Because he is, that statement, according to the order of Melchizedek, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, that is coming out of Psalm 110,
Yes.
verse 4. And that is written well after the Torah. So the Holy Spirit is inspiring the writer of that psalm,
David.
the writer, David, to make a statement about a priesthood that, wait a minute, they already had priests.
Yeah.
They already had the Aaronic priesthood. Why is there a pronouncement about another order of a priesthood if they've already got one?
Why is there the need to hearken back to Melchizedek?
If they've got everything they need in the current priesthood.
Right.
Because the current priesthood does not establish redemption, does not establish salvation. So, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for based on it the people had been given the Torah, what further need was there for a different priest to arise, designated according to the order of Melchizedek, not according to the order of Aaron? For whenever the priesthood is altered, out of necessity an alteration of law also takes place. So if you're going to change this, if you're going to change the priesthood, there has to be a change in the Torah under which it was based. That's what he's saying. For the one about whom these things are said belongs to another tribe. So they're talking, we're talking about Yeshua, we're talking about him as Messiah. He does not qualify to be a priest under the Mosaic covenant because he is not of the tribe of Levi. So, for the one about whom these things are said belongs to another tribe for which no one has officiated at the altar. Nobody from Judah has ever served as a priest before on the altar. For it is clear that our Lord has sprung forth from Judah. Concerning this tribe, Moses said nothing about the Kohanim, about the priesthood. And it is even more evident if another priest arises like Melchizedek, one made not by virtue of a Torah requirement, of physical descent, but by virtue of the power of an indestructible life.
Whoa.
So does Yeshua have a beginning? No. He is, God.
Same yesterday, today, and forever.
Same yesterday, today, and forever. He is God in the flesh.
The Word made flesh.
So he does not have a beginning. Does he have an end?
No.
Well, Satan kind of thought he had him and got him an end. That's why when he was buried in the ground, Satan was like, yes, we got him. It's over.
Yeah, no.
Guess what? That ain't happening. Yeah, that ain't happening. All right? So he doesn't have a beginning. He doesn't have an end. And he lives forever. That's the Messiah. That's Yeshua. So he qualifies as a priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Yeah, so it is testified, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Yeah. Because he is risen. He lives forever. And he can preside as a priest under the order of Melchizedek at the same time the Aaronic priesthood is operating.
But which one is superior? That's Yeshua. That's Messiah. So, for on the one hand, a former requirement is set aside because of its weakness and ineffectiveness. And that's a condition of the priesthood. Because he's already established a couple of chapters earlier. Where was that? Yeah, that's back at the end of chapter 5. That the priest, even the high priest, when he goes in before God at the altar, and when he goes into the holy place and does his ceremony, he first has to make an offering, a sin offering, because of his own sin.
Right.
So there is weakness and ineffectiveness. It's not that the Torah is bad. It's not that the priesthood is bad. But it's that they still are operating and enduring under the auspices of having sin. They still have, that still has not been dealt with in its entirety yet. And they still have to offer sacrifices, and they still die.
Mm-hmm.
They don't live forever. And that's a point he's going to make here in a little while. But the one hand, the former, the Aaronic priesthood, the requirement is set aside because of its weakness and ineffectiveness, for Torah made nothing perfect. Torah was not how their perfection or their redemption or sinlessness was attained.
And again, notice, this conversation is taking place on the basis of the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Go ahead.
Okay. Torah made nothing perfect, but on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. Okay, that's something that he's already said before. We can draw near to him. That's end of chapter 4. Therefore, let us draw near to the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace for help in a time of need. All right, so we can draw near because of the high priesthood of Melchizedek.
Now, we have to understand that from a Jewish perspective, too, because to draw near to the Jewish population at the time, when the temple meant you go before God at the temple. Mm-hmm. That was drawing near to God, right? And yet, through Melchizedek, through the priesthood of Melchizedek, through Yeshua, our high priest, we can come even closer than we could ever get through just the Levitical priesthood.
So they were tempted. They were asking the question, how can we draw near to God if we're not allowed to go back to the temple?
Right. That was an issue.
That was a serious issue. I mean, we're struggling in our day right now. Man, what are we going to do if we can't come back and meet together as the body of Christ? And we're struggling with that. I mean, a lot of people are. We don't like it. We don't like not being able to come together in fellowship with one another. I don't.
Yeah.
I hope you don't either. But so we are struggling that in our day. And imagine if you were under the mindset of, in the belief that in order for us to draw near to God, we have to be there. We have to be welcomed in the temple. And so they were seriously struggling with these things. Mm-hmm. And so he is saying, no, you don't have to go to the temple and gain their approval in order for you to draw near to God. You can draw near to God. That's a korban kind of a concept. You can do that and draw near to God through the ministry and the service and the work and intercession of Yeshua the Messiah.
Yes.
So don't think that you're an outcast. Don't think that you are far from God just because you are not welcome at the temple. And that's what he's trying to lay that groundwork for them, to reassure them.
So very important.
Mm-hmm. Moreover, verse 20, this is Hebrews chapter 7, verse 20. Moreover, it was not without a sworn oath. Others indeed have become priests or Kohanim without a sworn oath, but Yeshua, was made this priest with an oath, sworn by the one who said to him, Adonai has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. So the pronouncement, that was designating him as the priest, as the high priest under the order of Melchizedek, is the voice of God. Just like the same kind of voice that came down at his baptism. This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him.
There you go.
That's the voice that is also designating him as the priest forever. And so that settles the issue. It's not up for debate or dispute, regardless of what their criticisms are, regardless of what their challenges are. Well, he can't be the Messiah, or he can't be a high priest because he's not from the tribe of Levi. Well, guess what? We have another witness. Yeah. And it's a witness that has declared him so, and that's the authority and the voice of God himself. So, verse 22, How much more then has Yeshua become the guarantee of the better covenant, of a better covenant? And again, this is not negating.
No, it's not. It's not negating anything, because the better covenant is the covenant that provides redemption. Right? It's the first
It's the
covenant.
promise.
It's that promise given an oath of God that he would redeem. And Yeshua is the fulfillment of that covenant that God would redeem.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the covenant of redemption is greater even than the covenant necessary for growth in the life of the believer,
Mm-hmm.
for the redeemed person, which is the Mosaic covenant.
You have to be redeemed before the Mosaic can be of any value to you.
Right. So you have here the greater covenant being the Abrahamic covenant, because it is a covenant of redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So, I hope that's all making sense so far. Now, on the one hand, many have become priests who through death are prevented from continuing in office. He's establishing the weakness that he just mentioned a few verses before.
That they die.
The weakness and ineffectiveness. They die. They are prevented from continuing in office because they die. But on the other hand, the one who does remain forever has a permanent priesthood. All right. He is never going to die. He's never going to leave office. He's never going to resign. He's never going to be impeached. Any of those other kind of things that we see happening in our world. No, he's got that position, and he's never going to leave it.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, the one who does remain forever has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, so because of that, he is also able to save completely those who draw near to God through him, always living to make intercession for them. He is able to save completely those who draw near. So, he's
making intercession for him. Just like the priests were making intercession for the people before God at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because obviously, again, he's not saying that the temple service is not a good thing. But he's trying to console these people who have been thrown out of the temple, out of the synagogue, which Yeshua told them would happen.
And what happened to Paul?
In Matthew 24.
They were trying to make that happen to Paul. That's why he was arrested. That's what they charged him with. You're bringing Gentiles, or you're speaking against the temple. All of those different things were efforts to get him kicked out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, even though, yes, that's part of God's plan in terms of growth, in terms of maturity, in terms of sanctification. Yes. But that temple, because they rejected Yeshua, that particular temple was going to come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And for these believers, had already come to an end because they had been kicked out of it. And they needed to know that their high priest was greater even than the high priests who were corrupt,
ruling against
them, who rejected the Messiah in their day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That their high priest was greater, and that they still had access to the Father, and that their high priest was going to intercede for them because their high priest was seeing everything that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
They still had an advocate before the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They needed that consolation. But again, if the Aaronic priesthood was done and over, if the temple was done and over forever, for all eternity, it would not be coming back in the days of the kingdom of Messiah. But it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when it is, it's going to be greater. There's going to be more rejoicing. There's going to be greater joy than this world has ever seen at any other temple. Mm-hmm. It will be greater than the rejoicing of Solomon's temple.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And here's
but it will be happening under the auspices of Messiah himself, we will be able to do exactly what God called his people to do with a complete understanding of who Messiah is, what he has done for us, and with him sitting right there. And the joy will be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. And so this adds a little concept to something that we haven't talked a whole lot about yet, but we've referred to maybe a couple of times in other circumstances. Because when you think about it, when you think about the Temple of Solomon, when you think about the temple, the second temple that was built, when you even really think about the tabernacle, what priesthood oversaw the construction and building of those? Wasn't it the Aaronic priesthood that oversaw the building and construction of those things? Yes? Well, the instructions came from God, but they were the ones that did it.
Moses oversaw the tabernacle. Solomon oversaw the temple.
But who was the operating, functioning priest?
Once it was done.
While it was being made. Because what I'm getting at is
well, the problem is they could not be consecrated as priests until it was done.
Until it was done. That's true. But let me make this point.
He's trying to make a point. I don't know where he's
going. Because that actually might feed into it even better. Because I'm thinking out loud and I'm processing a little bit. So when you think about the third temple, the real third temple, who builds that?
Messiah.
Messiah does. So it's built under the auspices of what priesthood?
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek's priesthood. And so to your point that when the tabernacle had to be built before they could be consecrated as priests. Yeah. So that really does mean that the tabernacle was built under whose priesthood? Melchizedek's priesthood.
So, but you know, and again, Messiah will be functioning in the role of Moses at that point as well. And so he will oversee the building of the temple, and he will be the one who consecrates the priests again, who reconsecrates the priests. Moses consecrated his brother and his brother's sons, and yet Moses was not a priest. And in the Torah sense. In that sense. Yeah. And so Messiah will also function much in that role as well. And that's why when you get to the book of Ezekiel, I personally think Messiah is functioning in the role of the Son of Man in the book of Ezekiel, because it's the Son of Man who actually gives the instructions for the temple, who gives the measurements and the layout and everything for the actual temple.
The architect.
Yes.
Whose designer and builder is God.
Yes.
As he even uses that phrase here in Hebrews.
There you go.
So let's try to finish out chapter 7. Because we're coming up on an hour. I know. So, therefore he
is... a lot of stuff.
I know. He is also able to save completely those who draw near to God through him, always living to make intercession for you. So again, you have no need to go back to the temple because you have a priest that will let you draw near.
Yes.
For such a high priest, a Kohen Gadol, was fitting for us, holy, guiltless, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. Those things could not be said of the priesthood. No,
the Aaronic priesthood.
The Aaronic priesthood.
No.
They as good of men as they may have been, though we know there was corruption, they could not have been called completely holy.
I mean, even the ones in the past that we know were good priests could not have received that title.
Right. They were not considered guiltless.
Right.
They had to make an offering for their own sin first. They could not be considered undefiled despite all of the provisions and protections that they went through to try to preserve the high priest from being defiled. That doesn't mean that his sin still wasn't there. So he would, even after all of the protections that the high priest would go through, I mean, days and weeks in advance, he would still have to make an offering for his sin. And separated from sinners, which is what they tried to do. But every time somebody brought him a meal, guess what? You're not separated anymore.
Right.
And exalted above the heavens. Well, that obviously hadn't happened. So he, Yeshua, the Messiah, in this is Hebrews chapter 7, verse 27. The Messiah, he has no need to offer up sacrifices day by day like those other high priests. First for their own sins, and then for the sins of the people or of the nation. For when he offered up himself, he did this once for all. For the Torah appoints as the high priest, the Kohanim Gedolim, men who have weakness. But the word of the oath, which came after the Torah, appoints a son who's made perfect forever.
Because he has the power of an indestructible life. He is that spotless lamb, that one who never sinned, the one without blemish, right? The one who is forever.
The one whom death really had no
power
hold
over.
And no right to.
Right. That's right. So again, we're talking about the priesthood. We're talking about the functioning temple. We're talking about people who have been thrown out of that temple and how now they are to respond to God, how they are to come before God and not being able to go to the temple. Not that they didn't want to go to the temple, but they weren't able to go to the temple. They weren't allowed. They weren't allowed to go to the temple anymore.
And that issue of the messianic believing community were having to answer the question, how can we conduct ourselves as the people of God if we don't have access to the temple? Well, that has been a defining question for Judaism, non-believing, non-messianic Judaism, since the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. They have been trying to figure that one out too. How do we conduct ourselves as Jewish people with no temple? How can we have our sins covered if we don't have the Day of Atonement? Well, there's been writings after writings and rulings after rulings about prayer and the tzedakah and doing good deeds and trying to redefine the faith to explain how we can live without a temple. So Judaism itself had to have those same conversations just a few years after the book of Hebrews was written. And they don't have Messiah to give them an answer.
Right.
These guys do. The readers of the original readers of Hebrews have an answer to all of that fear, all of that dismay, all of that despair. You have Messiah who will do everything for you that even better than a living, functioning temple could do.
Especially operated without the understanding and oversight of Messiah. Now that Messiah has come.
If Messiah is not welcome in the temple, then you'll get nothing from the temple.
Yeah. That's kind of, because we are looking forward to the kingdom. We are looking forward as Messianic believers to the reinstitution of the temple service, of the avodah. We're looking forward to that, but we're looking forward to it under the auspices and direction of Messiah himself.
Yeah, when Yeshua went to the temple, that last week, he was rejected. He was not welcome.
And he was giving them the opportunity to recognize him for who he was.
And they missed the moment. They did not recognize the time of their visitation.
And that made him sad. He cried over Jerusalem before entering it. He wanted them to understand who he was. And he knew they would miss it. He was not excited about that.
Even though there was a blessing and benefit for the Gentile because of that.
Right.
But together, we should be looking forward to that day when Messiah is welcome in the temple, and he is the one who is overseeing it as the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Right. And that's something we as the Gentile believing community don't really think much about. That's not really a high list on our priority. Oh, that stuff's just for the Jews. That's what they need to worry about. That's not for us. And no, it is for us.
Yeah.
Because it is that.
It is for the people of
God. It is for the people of God.
Who have been redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
Who have been redeemed. And they, in that moment in the first century, rejected their redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a minute. If the Mosaic covenant, if the temple service is for a redeemed people and you reject your redemption, then the temple service, even the Mosaic covenant, does you no good, because it was never meant for one's salvation, for one's justification.
Well, what does he say? Burnt offerings and sacrifices I do not require.
Yeah, that's not our salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Never was, never will be. And ultimately, obviously, when we go into eternity after the 1,000-year reign of Messiah, there will be no temple, because everything would have been fulfilled. Yeah, the purpose of the temple would have been fulfilled, and the Father can now come down and be with a perfect people. In the presence of a perfect people, and we will be able to see him face to face.
Mm-hmm. Right?
So even in the time of the kingdom, when the temple is functioning, even under the direction of Messiah, we will be doing things that the Father has called for all along, and we will finally, think about this for a minute, God's people will finally get it right.
Mm-hmm. And understand what it's for.
And operate in wisdom and in understanding and knowledge of that revelation of who Messiah is. Mm-hmm. We'll finally get it right. And the Father will finally be able to be pleased and come and dwell with his people.
Mm-hmm. That's all
face to
the
face.
Last chapters of Revelation is all about. The joy of those times.
Yes.
So again, this is again establishing the point of you have Messiah, you have Yeshua, that don't be tempted to try to make peace and to be allowed back into the temple without Messiah. Don't give him up to get back in there. And so that's really the point that he's going to continue making.
Yes, he is.
And he's going to be establishing the relationship in the times ahead about what is the basis of our relationship. What kind of covenant is he rectifying or is he establishing for his people? If he's serving as a high priest and it has to be serving and operating under a covenant, then what's the nature of that covenant?
Yeah.
So that's where he's going next.
Covenant.
All right.
Yeah. All right, y'all.
So may the Lord bless y'all. If you have any questions or comments, things like that you want to leave for us, please do so. Please share the video. We try to keep it to an hour. I know that's a lot of time investment. So thank y'all for watching, Peter, Missy, and Brooke, Susan. It's good to see y'all. I just pray that the Lord continue to bless y'all. If you ever want to correspond with us, our website is www.restorationmessiah.com. My email is pastorkelly@restorationmessiah.com. We have a P.O. Box. It's P.O. Box 1271 in Talbot, Tennessee, 37877. That's if you ever wanted to send a letter or send any donations or anything to us. We'd love to, we're needing that as much as anybody else. Yeah. So the Lord is definitely working, and I know we look forward to seeing everybody again.
Amen.
And coming together and truly, seeing these things prepared for amongst his people, knowing that we as the people of God can draw near because of the service and the ministry of our high priest who lives forever.
Hallelujah. And
so it's in his name that we're signing off. May the Lord bless y'all and keep you, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And it's in the name of Yeshua that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Shalom, everybody.